The story of Syracuse begins not with a city, but with a spring, Chiane, the deep blue water where, according to local myth, the nymph Chiane tried to stop Hades as he abducted Persephone. Ovid tells us that when the god ignored her plea, Chiane melted into her own fountain. And this blend of violence and beauty, myth layered with geology, is exactly how the Greeks first imagined Sicily. The land itself felt alive, volcanic, fertile, dangerous. Too important to be left to the native people, the Sicels. It is here, on the island of Ortygia, that a group of settlers from Corinth, under the leadership of Archias, arrived around 734 and 733 BC. Even the arrival of Archias is wrapped in a cloud of legend. Plutarch, in his Amatorie Narrationes, tells a haunting story. Archias, before leaving Corinth, assaulted a young boy named Actaeon. The boy's family demanded justice, and the oracle at Delphi declared that the land itself would never prosper for Archias unless he sought a new beginning. So he sailed west. Historians, cold, suspicious and analytical, tend to dismiss the tale as a moralizing retrojection, a story Greek writers loved to use to explain how a city's founder carried guilt before establishing order in new lands. Yet, even if the story is embroidered, it fits a pattern we see throughout the Greek colonial world. The founder is both a civilizer and a fugitive, escaping stasis at home by forging a new destiny abroad. Syracuse, then, begins with a paradox, an act of violence that leads to a city of astonishing cultural richness. Now, in the official Greek history, they just settle the area. In truth, there must have been negotiation with the Sicels, the fights for the land, the inevitable displacement of local communities. Archaeology fills this silence. The earliest settlements on Ortygia show a rapid expansion, with granaries, defensive ditches, early temples, signs of a city that wasn't just expanding naturally, but asserted itself in a conflict with the locals. As if the Corinthian intended Syracuse to be a capital from the moment they touched shore. And Syracuse became that. A city that was already strategical, because Ortygia is both island and not island. A natural fortress with two harbors, one of them vast enough to shelter a fleet that would one day challenge Athens herself. No other Greek colony in the west possessed such a perfect maritime position. This is where Syracuse departs from Taras, the city we talked about, the Sparta of southern Italy. Taras, with its Spartan austerity and stoic limits, thrived by discipline. Syracuse, by contrast, thrived by abundance. Fertile plains, limitless grain, a land fat enough to sustain armies, arsenals, warships, philosophers, tyrants, and poets. The first century after its foundation is opaque, but we can see the shape of rising power. The Greek presence spread outward from Ortygia to the mainland peninsula, expelling or absorbing local populations, urbanizing in an emphatically Greek way. Agoras, temples, walls. The cult of Apollo became dominant. Remnants of early votive offerings, carved with Corinthian hands, still appear in the archaeological record. The Corinthians brought their gods, their poetry, their dialect, but they also brought a certain aggressive entrepreneurial spirit that all colonial ventures possessed. The West was not merely land, it was opportunity, wealth, a chance to escape the rigid aristocracy of old Greece. By the 7th century BC, Syracuse is already powerful enough to send out colonies of its own. Acrae, Kesmenai, and later Camarina. This is the moment a city stops asking what it is and begins declaring what it will be. Colonization is political messaging. We are the center, we replicate ourselves. And Syracuse replicates with confidence. But no Greek city rises without conflict. The Sicels resisted, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through arms. The fragmentary historian Philistus, himself a Syracusan, though a partisan of tyranny, records conflicts between early tyrants and the native populations. Even if his works survive only in quotations and hostile summaries, they reflect a persistent reality. Syracuse became great by defeating those who were there first. Now, the political structure of early Syracuse moves, like many Greek cities, from aristocracy toward broader civic participation, then snaps violently toward tyranny. The first of its major strongmen, Gelon, would not appear until the 5th century, but the groundwork for tyrannical power, the wealth disparity, the militarization, the expansion, begins much earlier. You cannot control a region like southeastern Sicily through consensus. You control it with walls, ships, alliances, and fear, and you need a leader for that. By the late Archaic period, Syracuse is the great magnet of Sicily. Immigrants from Corinth, yes, but also from other Greek cities, from the Peloponnese, from the islands. When Herodotus mentions Syracuse, rarely but with respect, it is already a place of consequence. And when we reach the 5th century, Syracuse is no longer simply a colony, it is the dominant Greek superpower of Sicily, with political reach extending into Italy, Carthage, and the central Mediterranean. Now, we have already cited Gelon, a man who did not come from Syracuse at all, but from Gela. Herodotus tells us that Gelon was a commander of the cavalry in Gela. Now, this cavalry, an elite class of land-holding warriors, loved him greatly, at least in the words of Herodotus. It is from this affection that power is born. When Gela dynasty faltered, Gelon seized control, and then, in one of the most decisive gambits in Greek colonial history, marched on Syracuse around 485 BC, taking it with almost effortless speed. Why? Because Syracuse was wealthier, more strategically placed, and more prestigious than Gela. Gelon understood the simple logic of empire: rule the richest city or remain a provincial strongman. And, well, when he had the military power to do it, he acted quickly before Syracuse could answer. Herodotus gives us a glimpse of Gelon ideology when he recounts the Sicilian invitation to join the Hellenic alliance against Persia in 480 BC. Gelon famously responds with an offer so outrageous it reveals the scale of Syracusan power. He will send 200 triremes and vast troops, but only if he is made commander of the Greek forces. Sparta refuses, Gelon refuses, and the war in the east continues without him. But what Herodotus does not say openly, what we must read between the lines, is that Gelon had already committed himself to a different existential war, the war against Carthage. The Punic cities of western Sicily were long-standing rivals of the Greek, and Carthage, alarmed by Gelon consolidation, launched a massive invasion in 480 BC under Hamilcar. This culminated in the Battle of Himera, one of the great battles of the ancient Mediterranean. Diodorus Siculus, drawing from the pro-Syracusian historian Philistus, describes a staggering confrontation. The Greek infantry holding fast, the cavalry, Gelon's speciality, driving into the Punic rear, the camp burning, the slaughter immense. Ancient writers love to synchronize the Battle of Himera with the Battle of Salamis in Greece, as if the gods coordinated victories for both branches of the Greek world. Herodotus refuses this mythical parallel, but Diodorus embraces it. Historiographically, this tells us more about Sicilian pride than chronology. Syracuse wanted his triumph to be understood as equal to the salvation of Greece, and in terms of consequences, it was. After Himera, Carthage withdrew from large-scale operations in Sicily for 70 years. Syracuse stood as the unchallenged superpower in the island. Gelon's successor, Hieron I, continues the project of empire building. A complicated figure, patron of poets, yes, but also a man whose rule was steeped in paranoia and concern, he transformed Syracuse into a court of intellectual brilliance. Yet beneath the shining surface lies steel. Hieron relocates populations, fortifies cities, extends Syracusan naval dominance, and most famously destroys the powerful Etruscan fleet at Cumae in 474 BC. This victory halts Etruscan expansion in the south and secures Greek dominance in the Tyrrhenian Sea. Syracuse is no longer just a Sicilian hegemon, it is a Mediterranean naval power. You can notice that all of these battles, the stopping of the Carthaginian advance, the stopping of the Etruscan advance south, is in truth preparing the way for Rome, avoiding that any other superpower rises too much, with Syracuse locked in the middle of them. But that is just hindsight, nothing particularly interesting. After Hieron's death, the tyranny collapses under its own weight. Resentment from displaced populations, power struggles among elite, the eternal Greek tension between tyranny and freedom. Everything collapses. A democracy emerges. For a moment, Syracuse seems to align itself with the constitutional norms of the Greek mainland. But democracy, in a city this large, this rich, and this militarized, is volatile, difficult to maintain. And it faces its greatest test in 415 BC, when the city is thrust into the center of geopolitical storms. The Athenians, drunk on the prestige of their empire and persuaded by envoys from Segesta, launch a massive Sicilian expedition. And if we look at the sources, Syracuse is presented as the counter-Athens, a mirror that reflects Athenian ambition back at itself. The early stages of the war are chaotic. The Athenians take key positions on Hippopole, a plateau west of Syracuse, heavily fortified. The city immediately panics. It is on the brink of falling. But then comes the turning point, the arrival of the Spartan general Philippus. Eternal rival of Athens, the Spartan reorganized the Syracusan forces, counter-builds fortifications, and finally surrounds the Athenian army. The climax, one of the darkest moments in classical military history, is the Battle of the Great Harbor. Triremes are locked together, infantry is fighting on the decks, the water is choked with wreckage and corpses. The Athenians attempted to break out after being surrounded, but they failed. This creates a nightmare. The land forces of Athens are left without a fleet. They flee into the interior of the city, harried, trapped, and eventually forced to surrender. And here, Syracuse shows a cultural trait that runs throughout its history: pragmatic brutality. The captured Athenians are imprisoned in the stone quarries, the latomie, where exposure, thirst, and disease kills them slowly. Syracuse becomes the graveyard of Athenian imperial ambition. After this victory, Syracuse stands at the peak of Greek prestige. But democracy again proves unstable, and when everything begins to fall into chaos, arises one of the most formidable and polarizing figures of ancient Sicily, Dionysius I. Dionysius embodies Syracuse's paradox, its capacity for astonishing achievements and ruthless oppression. Rising from relative obscurity, he seizes power in 405 BC by positioning himself as the defender of Syracuse against resurgent Carthage. His rule is iron-fisted but effective. Dionysius rebuilds the army, constructs massive siege engines, some of the earliest known to the Greek world, and erects the extraordinary Dionysian walls, a fortification stretching across the Hippopole plateau, so immense that even today archaeologists marvel at its scale. Under Dionysius, Syracuse becomes something almost unprecedented in the Greek world, a state with professional engineers, military laboratories, and experimental weaponry. It is the prototype of what will later become Hellenistic monarchies. Dionysius' legacy is inherited disastrously by his son, Dionysius II, whose reign is marked by incompetence, palace intrigue, and the involvement of, Plato. Yes, that Plato. He travels to Syracuse, seeking to educate Dionysius II into becoming a philosopher king. The result is a disaster. Plutarch's Life of Dion paints a tragic drama of idealism smashed against the rocks of Syracusan politics. Dion, Plato's ally, attempts to reform the state only to be murdered. Dionysius II is exiled, Syracuse becomes a battlefield of factions. And yet, even amid the turmoil, the intellectual energy of Syracuse remains astonishing. Philosophers, mathematicians, engineers continue to thrive. The city is chaotic, but not stagnant. Its military infrastructure, perfected under the Dionysi, becomes the most advanced in the Greek world. Syracuse enters the 3rd century BC like an aging giant. Scarred from internal conflicts, exhausted by its wars against Carthage, shaken by the rise and fall of tyrants, yet still possessing an intellectual fire unmatched anywhere in the Greek West. And in this aging city, as if the gods wished to concentrate all remaining brilliance in a single mortal, lived Archimedes, the man who embodies the final radiance of Greek Sicily. Archimedes was born around 287 BC during the rule of Hieron II, a man who stabilized Syracuse through diplomacy, loyalty to Rome, and careful management of wealth. So already we are in the era where Syracuse is working with Rome, not under Rome yet, but a loyal ally nonetheless. Unlike his tyrannical predecessors, Hieron II ruled like a pragmatic king, harsh when necessary, cautious always. Polybius, who respects stability above all, praises him as a model of leadership. Under Hieron, Syracuse becomes a strange hybrid, part independent monarchy, part tethered to Rome's growing power. Archimedes grows in this environment of relative peace, where the city's resources, its engineers, its patronage networks, its libraries, are strong enough to nourish a mind of terrifying clarity. Now, Archimedes rarely appears in contemporary political sources, which is telling. He is not a politician, not a general, not a figure who shapes policy. He is a scientist, a man who understands nature principles at a depth no one before him had approached. He left many treatises on floating bodies, on spirals, on the equilibrium of planes. They reveal a person who sees the physical world as something that yields to reason if pressed firmly enough. And yet, there is one role for which we remember Archimedes, for which he is known on the sources of his time. Archimedes was a weapon maker. Plutarch, in Life of Marcellus, gives us the most vivid account of Archimedes' military work. When the Second Punic War begins between Rome and Carthage, Syracuse becomes one of the centers of the geopolitical game. Hieron II remains loyal to Rome, but after his death in 215 BC, his grandson, Hieronymus, corrupted by flattery and hoping for glory, switches alliances to Carthage. The Romans immediately prepare to seize the city before it becomes the beating heart of Hannibal's Western strategy. After all, if Hannibal gained access to 1. a harbor, 2. a powerful fleet, he could contest the Mediterranean long enough to have supplies, reinforcements, everything he needed brought into Italy. The Roman consul Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Appius Claudius Pulcher led the invasion. Rome expected a swift victory. After all, Syracuse was wealthy but politically unstable. Its defenses were old. Its leadership was fractured. What Rome did not expect was Archimedes. Here began one of the remarkable sieges in ancient history. A siege where mathematics was more deadly than a warrior. Plutarch writes that Archimedes designed machines that, quote, with the least labor and in the shortest time, threw masses of heavy stones which came down with incredible noise and force, unquote. He described the claw-like grapples that snatched Roman ships out of the sea, lifting them, only to let them fall into the waves again, crushing them. He recounted long-range artillery capable of hitting Roman positions before they could approach the walls. Whether every detail is literal or embellished, the core truth is non-negotiable. Archimedes transformed Syracuse in a fortress of geometry. Marcellus' fleet attempted an assault to the walls of Ortygia. The reports, drawn from Plutarch and echoed by later Roman authors, describe Roman ships being shattered by stones hurled with such velocity that soldiers were decapitated. Towers splintered. Siege engines were smashed before they could be positioned. Plutarch adds that Archimedes employed multiple ranges of artillery, large engines for long-distance attacks, smaller machines for close combat, all perfectly calibrated to work in a symphony of destruction. The Romans came to fear the silhouette of the walls. A plank moved, a window opened, a beam extended. Soldiers flee, expecting yet another weapon of Archimedes. Marcellus, who initially mocked the Syracusan as decadent Sicilians, changes his tone entirely, calling Archimedes the geometrician who uses our ships like so many clay pots. Much debated is the burning mirror, the myth that Archimedes used concentrated sunlight to incinerate Roman ships. Ancient sources are ambiguous. Lucian mentions it. Galen implies it. Plutarch avoids committing to it. Modern historians doubt its battlefield practicality, but in historiography, myths reveal cultural truth. Syracuse, through Archimedes, was imagined as a city whose genius could wrap nature itself. A city of science fiction, we could say. The siege dragged on for 2 years. This endurance would have been impossible without Archimedes' defensive machines, which repeatedly repelled Roman assaults and bought precious time. But Syracuse is attacked not only from without, but from within. Its politics fracture, its morale wavers. Famine begins to creep through the population. Rome is patient, Rome is methodical, Rome is inevitable. In 212 BC, during the festival of Artemis, Roman forces exploit a lapse in vigilance. They scale the hexapylon gate by night and pour into the upper city. Syracuse, defended by mathematics but weakened by human frailty, collapses. It is again through Plutarch that we can hear a story about what happened. Marcellus, though eager to claim the city's wealth, orders that Archimedes be spared. But Archimedes is found by a Roman soldier while drawing geometric diagrams in the sand. The soldier orders him to follow. Archimedes refuses until he has finished his proof. The soldier, insulted and growing impatient, kills him. And so, the most brilliant mind of ancient Mediterranean died not in a laboratory, not in a palace, but in the ground, protecting a diagram from being smudged. Cicero, centuries later, found Archimedes' grave overgrown and neglected. Its engraved sphere and cylinder barely visible. Sicily under Rome becomes a province, the first province of the Roman Republic and therefore the Roman Empire. Its grain fields, its fertility, becomes the lifeblood of the new Roman war machine. Under Roman administration as the first province, so a submitted area and not just another Italian ally, the brilliancy of the political experiments, the mechanical laboratories, the tyrants, the poets, the mathematicians, everything is dimmed and slowly disappeared. But Syracuse did not vanish. Cities of this magnitude never vanish. But it is tamed. Its spirit, once restless and electrified, is folded into the order of empire. And yet the story ends not with a lamentation, but with a paradoxical victory. Rome conquered Syracuse, yes, but Syracuse became the beachhead of Greek culture into Rome. Archimedes' treatise, after all, entered the intellectual bloodstream of the Mediterranean. Copied, studied, carried to Alexandria, to the Roman elite, eventually preserved by Arabic scholars, re-entering Europe in the Renaissance. The machines that terrified Roman soldiers becomes the ancestors of modern engineering. The mathematics that Archimedes scribbled in the dust becomes the foundation of calculus and hydrostatics. Syracuse falls, but its mind does not. This is why Syracuse is not just the Athens of the West. It is something more complex, new, more paradoxical. A city where tyranny bred genius, where democracy survived disaster, where poets praised kings and engineers altered the fate of battles. A city that rose through war, peaked through intellect, and died by the slow, grinding logic of empire. And if you go there today, the water of the fountain Kirane still flows. The harbor is still wide and blue. And even if it's covered by the modern city, you will be able to see what Archias saw. A new beginning, still there, waiting.